I'm Thor Jurgensen. I am the editorial page editor of the Daily Item and itemlive.com. I would like to thank Swampscott School Superintendent Pamela Angelakis, Swampscott Educational Access channel at Swampscott High School, and the TV studio production and media arts class led by Joe Dillette for the opportunity this morning to talk to school committee candidates Carin Marshall, Amy O'Connor, and Keiko Zoll. Our format is going to be very simple. The candidates will each have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. We'll go in alphabetical order. And then we will have 3 questions directed by me to the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question. I will then make brief concluding remarks. I'm fortunate today to have our timekeeper, Meredith Luter. She will wave her hand or hold up her hand 5 seconds before the end of the 2 minutes to give you a heads up on the conclusion. Without any more talking on my part, we will start the introductions, beginning with Carin Marshall.
Thank you. My name is Carin Marshall. I am a current member of the school committee. I am seeking re-election for my 3rd term. I'm also Precinct 2 town meeting member, and I have 2 children in the Swampscott public school systems, Sydney and Jack. I have spent the last 6 years on the school committee, and I feel that we have accomplished so much in this time, but there is still work to be done, and I would really love you to allow me to complete that work. We have so many great things happening in our district, and I've had just so many proud moments over these 2 terms, but there is still work to be completed, and I feel that at this time we are at a critical juncture where we don't want to lose momentum. We have negotiations ongoing. We are in the process as a town of building a new elementary school, and we have finally some consistency in leadership. And I think that's really important and something that we need to focus on. So I would ask that on April 30th, you vote for Carin Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connor.
Hi, I'm Amy O'Connor. I am the current chair of the school committee, and I am running for my 3rd term in office. I have been involved with Swampscott Education as a volunteer for more than 10 years, running programs at the Stanley School, volunteering for the PTA, fundraising, but most importantly is my work here on the school committee. I think you'll hear me say things that are very similar to what Ms. Marshall was saying, because we are at a critical juncture on the school committee. We are, for the first time in at least a decade, have consistency in leadership, and that leadership is on the school committee as well as in the superintendent's office. And consistency really is what allows a district to have traction in their programming. And this is the first time that we're seeing in at least a decade where we have a superintendent who's actually going into her 2nd 5-year plan. We're very proud of that. We are working really hard, being very fiscally conservative, because we know that we have some big projects coming up, namely an elementary school. And in the end, what I think this is about is stopping the consistent change that has happened in our district over the years, having some consistency so that we can keep our momentum. We know that consistency in leadership is directly related to student success, and we want our district to continue to be high performing. So I ask for your vote on April 30th.
Thank you. Ms. Zoll.
Thank you. My name is Keiko Zoll, and I am a proud Swampscott resident. I'm an editor at a digital media brand for parents. I'm the mom of a kindergartner at Stanley, and while a relative newcomer to town, I am a proud Swampscott resident
resident ready to make a difference in my community. My background is in communications. I have 10 years of professional experience in digital media and publishing, 7 years of student development experience in higher education, as well as experience at nonprofits and grassroots advocacy. I was a 2013 New Leaders Council Fellow, and I've won several awards for my advocacy work on behalf of children and families. I'm running for a school committee on a platform of transparency, service, and growth, to be a voice for Swampscott's young families and to bring a fresh perspective to the table. In terms of transparency, I believe that we should have a school committee and a district that has a 21st century communications plan. In terms of service, I believe very much in the idea of the public servant role. It's something that every member of the school committee is by nature of being an elected official. And in terms of growth, the key to our town's growth relies on attracting and retaining young families here. That's going to increase our tax base, and it will also, by increasing the tax base, we are able to better fund our schools. And the linchpin for attracting young families here is having a really strong school district. It's what brought me and my family here a year ago to town. We came here for the schools. So, and I'm humbly asking for your vote as a voice for a fresh perspective to the table on April 30th.
Thank you. Our first question, and again, a reminder, 2 minutes for a reply for each one of you, is this: what do you see as the major issues affecting Swampscott schools? If we can start with you, Ms. Marshall.
Sure. I would say right now, Swampscott is focused on a few different things, but basically around the concept of social emotional learning. So we have a district strategy, we have a district plan, we work very hard outlining the goals that we're trying to meet as a district. And something that has come out in our society is the greater need to focus on the social emotional well-being of our students. And that has been a large focus, and it will continue, I think, to be an even greater focus in the future. We are trying to accomplish that, by shining a light on it, spending our time and resources looking at these issues and trying to find solutions. And we are actively working with the Essex Community Learning Collaborative over the past couple of years towards these goals, working with 6 other districts, collaborating on these issues, because these issues are being seen all over the state and all over the country. And I really feel that we have the best people in place in our district to look at these issues and to come up with solutions. The superintendent is hyper-focused on this issue, and we have a director of student services who I think is unparalleled in her experience and her ability to meet these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connor.
So the school committee has a fairly limited focus. We are responsible for creating policy, for managing our superintendent, and for management and oversight of the budget. And I think that identifies pretty clearly what it is that we're responsible for, and importantly, where I see our focus over the next few years. It really, the budget is going to remain one of the most important things, not just for our schools, but for our town. We have to live within our means. We have to have a conservative budget that we need to stick to in order to continue to offer the high-performing services that we do to children of all kinds. We need to sort of constantly be evaluating where we're spending our money, how we're spending our money, in order to meet all of the needs of all our varied learners. At the same time, we recognize that we have an amazing educator force. Our teachers are the glue of the district, and we want to continue to attract and keep them. We're known for having teachers who've been in district for a really long time. We think that has a lot to do with how we value them with their contracts, and we need to keep that going. But at the same time, we recognize that that Swampscott has a tax problem. We're taxed too highly, and part of what the school needs to do in order to help the town function properly is to work within its means and contain budget spending.
Thank you. Ms. Zoll.
So I see one of the biggest issues that's facing our school district right now actually is a broader issue with the town. We have very changing demographics that most people may not realize. So Swampscott is an aging in place community. And what that means is if we want to be able to attract and retain young families, we've got to have a strong school system, but then you're also dealing with the issue of if you have a population that's 65 and older, they are potentially living on a fixed income, and it's a big ask to get them to potentially fund schools that they themselves may not even have children in, or they may not even have children, which is about 70% of this district, of this town. So in addition to the broader demographics of the town, then you start drilling down on a level where you're looking at the individual enrollment in our schools. We have about 2,200 students in our schools. Of those, 12% are first language, not English. 5.5% are English language learners. Both of those numbers have more than doubled in the last decade. In terms of students with disabilities, we've seen that number rise 25% over the last decade. Currently, we have 17.5% students with disabilities. And what that translates into is students that require more resources and more funding. On a state level, we get what amounts to $3 million from the state as part of Chapter 70 public funding for our schools. And as a result, the town carries a higher burden to help meet the needs of all of those students. Our enrollment overall is declining. It's been declining about 2% over the last decade. And so what that means is we're seeing higher concentrations of students who require more services, but the funding that we're receiving at a state level is not keeping pace with those needs, and so that burden falls on Swampscott taxpayers. So that is what I see as a critical issue that's facing our schools. And one of the things that is central to what I think is really important that the school committee should be doing is keeping Swampscott kids in Swampscott schools, because every child that leaves this school district is money that we can no longer reach for our schools.
Thank you. We'll move on to the second question. Do you see a benefit to building-based budgeting? And if the answer is yes, what are the benefits? Again, we'll start with you, Ms. Marshall.
Thank you. Yes, I do see a benefit to budget-based, building-based budgets. We've been doing this probably, I don't know, the last several years. And what it allows us to do is really make sure that the staffing and the assets that we're tracking are allocated in the right place, so that teachers and other staff and all the resources that we're budgeting for are in the proper and known place, so that we can track it properly, we can compare amongst the buildings. We do have 5 buildings in our small town, so it's actually really important that we're able to do that. It makes it easier to look at, makes it easier to track, it makes it easier to explain to the town side of government and the finance committee, and it brings sort of clarity to the overall picture. It's the biggest piece of the town budget overall, and so you need to make sure that everybody understands it and that we know exactly where we're spending our money. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connor.
I think that it's a good question. I think that building-based budgets are really important because what they do is they tie in with independent leadership at our schools, which is a foundation of Massachusetts law. The way that our district works is that we have school councils who work in the individual schools, who work with the leadership in those individual schools. Those leaders in turn work with our superintendent and her leadership team. who are driving the district priorities and the broader budget, and that sort of circles back. So it's a continual loop. And what a building-based budget does is it allows each individual building to focus on their priorities in the way that is appropriate according to their plans. And it also then informs the school committee as we're forming the budget each year on how we should be prioritizing and what decisions are made. So that while one particular school may want something in particular, that they in turn are working with their peers so that there is equity throughout the district. I think that answers the question. So
thank you very much.
Sure.
Ms. Zoll.
I think building-based budgeting makes sense. I think it's a smart way to do things. In addition to what both Carin and Amy have shared, is that I think by allowing each school to focus on their priorities, it also provides a measure of accountability when you look at end of year spending. Where was money being spent? And it also provides an opportunity as well that if there's a sense of that there's not equity between schools based on budgets, then what resources can we be bringing into those schools to help kind of pad out where funding gaps might exist? So whether it's taking advantage of grants and other programs, if it's a matter of looking into what other state resources exist out there to help meet those needs. For example, the middle school right now, as part of the FY20 budget that's been proposed by Town Administrator Sean Fitzgerald, they're looking at a ballpark of about $3 million to help do repairs to the roof, to framing, to windows, to HVAC, repairs that are all desperately needed. And one of the things that we want to make sure we're doing is, does that money need to come from the town, or are we making sure that we're exhausting all of the other resources that could be out there available to us, such as emergency funds offered by the Massachusetts School Building Association, so that tax burden isn't carried solely on Swampscott residents. But I believe that, back to just the broader point of building-based budgeting, it just provides a greater view of accountability, seeing what resources people have, what resources they don't, and then I think that the school committee and the superintendent and the business administrator can all work together to figure out, all right, how do we meet those gaps?
Can I add a little
Certainly.
piece to that? I think it's important to note that building-based budgeting doesn't have anything to do with the care and maintenance of the building, particularly as it relates to the middle school, and that's capital planning. And those are really part of the district, of the town's infrastructure. To that end, the school department, the school committee, as well as our facilities department, really works in conjunction with town hall in possibly identifying, but more importantly, we worked together 2 years ago to create a shared resource that works between town hall and the schools to help manage our infrastructure issues, like what would be happening at the middle school. So that's not
that those are part of a much broader 10, 20, even 30-year plan that we're looking at townwide.
So our individual building leaders would not be responsible for managing the infrastructure of their buildings.
So to clarify, but not belabor this too much, number one, how long has building-based budgeting been in the schools?
At least for 5 years. It could have been prior to that.
No, I believe it was 5.
But it would have been much longer ago.
Its primary focus in terms of constructing a budget and financial analysis is what element of school funding? What does it primarily focus on?
The concept of building-based budgeting? It focuses on giving building leaders the ability to focus on what their priorities are in conjunction with a larger plan that's set out by the superintendent and her leadership team.
Very good. Did you want to make any additional comments on this, Ms. Zoll?
Just to clarify too, that also the budget, the building-based budgeting in terms, like I understand it's not infrastructure related, but that goes towards programmatically and what's happening with staff-wise within those buildings,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, it would include staffing, it would include resources, it would include
Paper and
right.
Computers,
Technology.
Energy.
Got it.
and
energy, et cetera. Yeah.
Very good. I appreciate the clarification on all your parts. Our third question is, Swampscott again is in the process of building a school. What are the longer-term ramifications and challenges with this project, especially set against the backdrop of the whole debate now? Is it 5 years ago on the district-wide school?
Right. Okay, so the question is,
as the school project evolves, the new construction project, what are the long-term ramifications and challenges involved in that project?
so I would say the long-term challenges of any project of this size is getting the buy-in from the community. You need to educate the community on what the needs are. We've been doing that for quite a long time, but it still needs to continue, as well as what all the various options are. And then finally, when it comes time, the buy-in on how to fund it. Because this is going to be a very large project. It's going to be probably the most expensive project that we've done in a generation, for a generation to come. And so it's going to require everybody to come together and finally make this happen. Ramifications, if it were not to happen, are even greater. At this point, we only have one school, one elementary school that is ADL compliant in part, which means that people with disabilities can enter the building and get from one floor to the next. And frankly, our youngest students deserve better than that. They deserve a building that meets the 21st century needs, that has natural light, that has full-size gymnasiums, full-size working cafeterias. I mean, these things should be a given, and yet in our situation they are not. Also, we need to think about meeting our district educational vision, which says that we want our grades educated together. So we want all of our first graders together, all of our second graders together, all of our third graders together. This needs to happen so that we can educate our children in the best way. Educators can collaborate. All the kids can be together. Special education needs can be together. These were identified as goals a couple of years ago coming out of that failed vote. And it's been what we've been using to march forward. But at this point, it's basically moving past that to the town. It is a town project. It's a town initiative, and it has to be done at the town level. Sorry, I was getting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. O'Connor.
I'll echo that to some degree. The long-term ramifications really are budget and affordability. Again, this goes back to the taxes here in Swampscott and what we can do and how we can live within our means. This is why it's so important for us to continue on an annual basis to live frugally, so that on the long term we can provide our educators and the students buildings that are worthy of their expertise and their education. I think that it's the idea that there might be a single school is something that can be very concerning to many people, especially parents of young kids, not wanting their kids to be far from home. It's why we live in a small community. And the answer may not be a single school. But we do know that we want the grades together. As Ms. Marshall was saying, we recognize that educational parity is really critical. Kids on one side of town should not be receiving more or less than kids on another side of town. We are a very small community, and we need to behave that way and make sure that everybody is being supported equally. So the question that I'm asked all the time is, where's this school going to be? And there really is, at this point, it's hard to say, and there really is no answer, but importantly, this is not a school committee decision. This is a decision that's being made by the town. It's part of a larger infrastructure project, and in the same way that the police officers weren't deciding where the police station was going to go, the school committee and the teachers are not deciding where a new school would be. We're just, as I said, we focus on ensuring that our superintendent is performing, ensuring that our policies are right on, and ensuring that our budget is as it should be. And that budget will help us to be an affordable community.
Thank you, Ms. Zoll.
So The town is overdue for a new elementary school building. Like I said, my son is a kindergartner at Stanley, so I feel that very acutely on a very personal level. I have a neighbor across the street whose son is at Hadley and feels that even more acutely than I do. We haven't had a new elementary school building or updates to a new elementary school building since 1952, and as they exist, they just cannot meet the needs of 21st century students. When the school building vote failed 2-1 last time, that was a really critical moment where I think the schools were needed. The need for a new school building was overdue 5 years ago, and now if a new school building doesn't come to this town, then it's even more overdue. And I think that the biggest challenge that we face is, again, we have a population where only about 20 to 25% of the town has children in schools. And you're making a big ask of a larger percent of the population who may be living on a fixed income. And I think the way that is critical to get that buy-in, even though the purview of the school committee is budget policy and the superintendent of schools, I think there should be an active effort on the part of the school committee so that the school building committee can focus on all of the expertise that they already have in their grouping, that they're focusing on design, the owner project manager, figuring out a location, all of the logistics that come with that. And then having the school committee be the community ambassador to make this an attractive option to vote for and hopefully pass. And that's something that's done in conjunction on all levels of town governance, working with the finance committee, planning board, the board of selectmen. And that's something that, if elected, I would love to be able to develop a comprehensive community outreach plan that gets buy-in across all levels on town governance to be able to outreach to the voters to get them to bring this on board for our kids.
Can I add a little something?
Please.
I would just say that community outreach is huge. I just want to delineate that when it comes to the point where you're talking about a potential override, there are limitations then to what an elected official in the school committee role is and isn't allowed to do. So I just wanted to.
Did anyone else want to add anything else?
I'd like to. I neglected to talk about an important piece of this being a budget-based, finance-based problem, is that affordability, the only way that Swampscott is going to be able to afford a new project of this scope is to participate in the MSBA program, which is a state-funded program that helps to reimburse our district, our town, for money spent on building a new school. We simply could not afford to go this alone. Because we had a failed vote the last time, it was very difficult for us to get back into the swing of things. With incredible diligence on the part of the superintendent, her leadership team, and the school committee, we met some really important hurdles very early so that we could get back into the MSBA process. That was critical for us and could not have been done without the diligence of the leadership team here. And the MSBA is really looking at the changes that have happened in our district as emblematic of being worthy to be back in this process, which is why I think it's really important for the school board to remain consistent and the superintendent and her leadership to remain consistent, because that is part of how we got back into this program so quickly.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I'd love just to add a little bit to that. So I understand that there are limitations on what elected officials can and cannot say regarding the process, but I don't think it's out of the scope of the school committee to be able to set a communications plan where, if that's not something that the school committee can go out there and directly say, hey, we can do X, Y, Z, at least put a plan in place to work with other stakeholders to be able to get that message out there. I think that's really critical. Thank you, Amy, for bringing up the fact that we have to work within what the Massachusetts School Building Association says we can. There are 4 proposals that we are allowed to look at as a town right now. And there are some people, I mean, I've knocked on over 200 doors and talked to 100 people in person, and there are people like, wait, there are how many proposals? I thought it was just rehabbing Hadley. And it's like, no, actually, that's not it. And so I think it's important to at least do the informational work to get that information out there. Even just, you know, a 30-second to 1-minute video that you can blast out on social media that says, hey, here's everything, here's what's on the table, here's what we're doing. we are, despite being an aging in place population, a large part of this town is connected online, and I think we need to be reaching people where they're at, whether it's in their community or through the channels that they're interacting with the town.
I would like to thank our candidates for this lively and engaging forum. Everyone remember to vote on April 30th, which is a Tuesday. And please read the daily item and itemlive.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Opportunity.
Quite well.